The mayor wants more housing, and he wants it in everyone's backyard. When the very high rent on your small apartment suddenly gets much higher, what can you do? Help may be on the horizon. And bankruptcy over wildfire liability looms for PG&E, the largest investor-owned utility in California. What will this mean for San Diego? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen, Rob Nicoleski, energy reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune, and investigative reporter Amitha Sharma of KPBS News. Well, who was that guy? Twitter was a Twitter with that question following this week's State of the City address by San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer. The mayor did an about-face on housing restrictions, saying it's time to strip anti-housing forces of their power. And here's Faulconer explaining his transformation.
We must change from a city that shouts, "Not in my backyard," to one that proclaims, "Yes, in my backyard." From a city of NIMBYs to a city of YIMBYs.
Kevin Faulconer, the YIMBY mayor. Yeah. Andrew, start there. What are we talking about? What are these changes?
So Faulconer, we heard, is now really aligning himself with this movement that's spreading across the entire state to say yes to new housing. That the big problem, the biggest reason why our housing is so unaffordable in California is that we have a growing population, we have a growing economy, but we haven't grown in housing. So there are fewer homes for everyone to go around, and with competition among home buyers and renters and everything, the price of housing is going to go up.
And so what specific changes is he talking about here?
Yeah, so he made a couple of pretty ambitious proposals. I would say the most eye-popping to me was he wants to eliminate height limits across the city in transit priority areas. So when you're close to a major bus stop or a trolley station, there will be no limits under this plan on how tall buildings can go. And so this would, theoretically be very controversial among a lot of groups in San Diego. But it would really have a big impact on the amount of homes that a developer would be allowed to build near transit.
And we've had battles on that very issue lately. In fact, didn't Faulconer back down not that long ago on that issue?
Yeah, so I mean, you said about face. I'm not sure that's entirely fair. I think Faulconer has always supported new housing. But a recent example where he lowered the height limit around a specific plan near a future trolley stop is one example of where he kind of backed down in the face of pressure from folks who didn't want to see those taller buildings go up.
And what neighborhood was that? Was that Claremont?
Linda Vista, yeah.
Linda Vista, okay.
And we should also mention some of the other proposals that he included in his speech, not just height limits, but also allowing unlimited density for certain projects that include below market rate units or units for low-income folks or people who are exiting homelessness. And he also mentioned a proposal that he had previously introduced and that should be heard by the City Council fairly soon on parking standards. So if you build a project near a major transit stop, you won't be required to include any on-site parking. And that's really meant to kind of provide an extra nudge to get people out of cars and help with the city's climate goals.
Okay. So I'm wondering, this is pretty huge. Why do you think this transformation has happened with the mayor? And how much of it do you attribute to our new governor, Gavin Newsom's position, very stern position on withholding transportation dollars from communities who do not do enough to build housing, new housing?
Yeah, so a couple things, I think. On that proposal, we have yet to see a lot of details, but certainly I think there is a lot of pressure from the state on local governments to start approving more housing, to lower the bar of approval for housing, to basically just the cities and counties have had almost unfettered control over their own land use, and it's led us to this severe housing shortage across the state. And so there's absolutely a lot of pressure on mayors like Faulconer and other mayors across the state to do that. But I also think that Faulconer is kind of stepping into this bolder and more ambitious framework because he has 2 years left in his term. he's not going to have to run for re-election as mayor. We'll see whether or not he wants to run for higher office. But this is really a proposal that is getting a lot of attention, not just in San Diego, but across the state, certainly raising his profile. And so I think that, he sees this as the right time. The YIMBY movement is growing, and he thinks maybe it'll be on the right side of history, and so he should join up with them.
Well, we said the mayor expects opposition. There's going to be opposition here. We got another bite from him. Let's hear what he has to say about this fight.
And let me say, I understand that some San Diegans may fear homeless programs and affordable housing coming to their community. But we cannot let fear control our actions. Saying not in my backyard is saying yes to homelessness in our canyons, our parks, and on our streets.
All right, so that fight is coming. I did want to ask you specifically, you mentioned around trolley stops and transit hubs, and that's where he's pushing for the denser growth. But there's some areas that are exempt along the coast, right? Explain that.
Right. So in 1972, city voters passed Proposition D, which set a 30-foot height limit in the coastal zone, which is defined as west of Interstate 5 and north of downtown. So communities like Pacific Beach, La Jolla, Mission Beach, the Midway District, and Point Loma all are exempt from any of these proposals. And I think it's worth noting that this is one fight that Faulconer is not willing to have. There are certain red lines that you don't cross as the mayor of San Diego, and folks both in the coastal communities and outside of them, I think, are really protective of that 30-foot height limit.
Now, what sort of reaction have we gotten from the council and other reaction to the mayor's proposals in the community?
Yeah, well, I spoke with Council President Georgette Gomez after the speech. I would describe her response as encouraged, but waiting to see more details. So, Faulconer has in the past, in previous State of the City addresses, made some bold pronouncements, and then things kind of either got watered down or he just wasn't able to build the kind of political support to get things done. And so, she's waiting to see the details. I also spoke with the two most prominent mayoral candidates right now, Todd Gloria, a state assemblyman and former city councilman, and Barbara Bree, a city councilwoman. And they both were hesitant to give the mayor too much credit, I think probably because they're running to replace him. And Todd Gloria said something interesting to me, which I thought, he said, it's interesting and encouraging to see the mayor embracing proposals that previously he was not supportive of. So kind of a backhanded compliment there, I guess.
All right, just a few seconds left in this segment, and we'll see where the devil is in the details, as you say. One other thing this week, the mayor said no special election this year and expanding the downtown convention center, so that's going to go off to the election year.
Yes, that'll be, we'll have to wait till 2020 to vote on that measure. This would raise the hotel room tax to fund an expanded convention center and also some homeless services and affordable housing and infrastructure. So I think he really wanted to vote on it this year, but he saw the political reality of having 6 Democrats on the city council who were not willing to just go along with his agenda no matter what. And so, he kind of left that aside and is, still trying to get support for it in 2020, but we're not going to vote on it until then.
And one other thing, the mayor did a push for this the Spa War site, this big chunk of land near Old Town, and we're talking about a big transit hub, and we'll talk more about that on future shows, but that was really interesting in terms of getting the trolley and some shuttle extension to Lindbergh Field. Right,
so this is happening at the same time that the airport is talking about expanding Terminal 1. Which is in desperate need of expansion. Everyone agrees that. But there wasn't a willingness from the airport to analyze a trolley connection or a rail connection to the airport. And so Mayor Faulconer, and the new executive director of Sandag teamed up and came up with this plan to create a new transit hub on that Navy property that you mentioned, and we'll finally create this rail connection to the airport. So that's another thing we'll have to see a lot more details on.
I think I mispronounced the Spa War, it's Spay War.
Spay War, yeah.
But anyway, we'll be talking more bites at that apple as we go on. Well, we are going to move along now. 40 years after Prop 13 capped property taxes, there's a movement now to limit rent increases. As California home prices have soared in recent years, rents have followed right along. A huge factor, of course, is supply and demand. And Amitha, start by telling us just how bad is it out there, the affordability for renters?
Well, financial experts say that if you spend more than a third of your income on housing, rent or mortgage, that's considered to be housing burdened. In California, that advice is particularly applicable in California, where more than half of tenants pay over a third of their income on rent, and where more than a third of tenants in the state pay more than half. So they're severely burdened.
Yeah, in cities like San Diego, and you go up the coast, Los Angeles, the San Francisco area, rents are just astronomical.
They are. I mean, the median price of a one-bedroom apartment in San Diego is $1,950. In Los Angeles, it's $2,400. And I think a one-bedroom in San Francisco goes for about $3,500.
So you start thinking about people like teachers and cops and anybody who has a job that doesn't pay very much, perhaps a janitor or a store clerk. How in the world do they live? And I mean, they have these people doing these jobs in San Francisco, don't they? How do they live and afford it?
Some people are working multiple jobs. Some people are doubling up. Some people are moving in with families.
Commute from
Kids
many
are
miles
staying
away.
in longer. But you know, this high cost of housing takes money away from other very basic, very crucial expenses like food, like medical care, like dental care, savings accounts, retirement accounts, saving for your your kids' college education. So, I mean, it's sucking money out of other, again, very crucial expenses.
And just disposable income. If you're paying, 50% of your income on rent, then you're probably not going out to eat in the restaurants in your neighborhood, going out for coffee.
Ripple effect on everything.
That affects the economy.
Now, your story focused also on these folks who have experienced these sudden jumps in rent and huge percentage increases. Here, you talked with a young man in La Mesa, for example. I mean, give us that example.
Yeah, I mean, about a year ago, he got a notice saying that his rent was going up about 30%. And the reason that he was given was that the new landlords, the new owners of the building, wanted to install a sound system in his bathroom. And he laughed and he said, "Look, I don't need a sound system in my bathroom.
And I don't need a rent increase
I
either.
don't need a rent increase." And so he ended up finding another place, which he thought was better, and moved away. But not everybody is in that position that can do that.
Yeah. Now, so what can tenants do about an exorbitant rent hike like that one?
Well, I spoke to a tenants' rights lawyer who actually is the executive director of a group called Tenants United. It's a coalition of tenants' rights advocates up and down the state. And he said the way California law is written right now, there's very, very little that a tenant can do when the rent goes up, that pretty much landlords in this state are free to raise the rent as much as they want.
All right. Now, that gets us into this idea about capping it. You talked on the phone with Scott Wiener, Democrat from San Francisco, why he believes capping rent increases is a good idea. Let's hear that.
That shortage is leading to displacement, evictions, people becoming homeless, working families leaving, young people not having stable housing. Until we get there, we need to take action to keep people stable in the housing that they have.
So Wiener made the point that, look, the state is short about 3.5 million homes over the next decade. And that's a housing crisis. The mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, said the same thing at a mayor's forum back in November. And the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, said the same thing. Libby Schaaf said, look, I would like to get our state legislators to say that we have a housing crisis. It's akin to an emergency. It's akin to a natural disaster. And those very anti-price gouging rules that kick in during a natural disaster should apply to the current housing crisis. And what those rules look like is that you cannot raise the price on goods and services beyond 10% during a natural disaster or any kind of emergency. And she wants that rule to apply to apartment rents until the crisis is over.
All right. Where's Mayor Faulconer on this, or the leaders in San Diego?
I asked to interview him for this piece, and he declined. So I didn't get a sense of where he stands on this.
Okay. A lot of forces against this, I would imagine, here. Who are the folks lining up with this against this idea of restricting rents in the crisis?
Well, I spoke to the head of Tenants United, which is the San Diego Tenants Advocates Group, and Rafael Bautista said he worries that if such a cap was passed by the state legislature, that the effect would be from politicians that, look, we've got a rent cap, it's around 10%, you don't need rent control. And he's saying so many people can't afford a 10% increase, they can't afford a 5% increase. He says he makes the argument that what's really needed is true rent control, where landlords are allowed to raise the rent maybe 1, 2, 3% every year. I also spoke to the head of the Apartment Association of California.
Yeah, the opposition, right?
The landlords, and the head of that group, Dan Fowler, said, no way, no. This would be completely unfair. He calls it tenants' welfare because he said, what you're saying is that, look, tenants can't afford to pay their rent, and so we ought to subsidize it, but you're asking a small group of people, i.e. the landlords, to subsidize their rent. So he says, look, if society thinks this is a good idea, then it ought to be society that will subsidize.
I just wonder, you know, that sort of hardline stance against even anti-rent gouging laws probably comes from the results from last November when there was rent control on the ballot, you know, a measure that could allow cities, and it was defeated really astronomically. 60%, I think it was, that voted against this. And so the landlords, I imagine, are feeling in much a stronger negotiating position.
Very strong negotiating position.
They say the market sets the rates anyway.
Right. He was very clear about it. He said it's just not fair. Let the market set the rate. He said that, you know, if the market couldn't tolerate these double, sometimes triple-digit rent increases that we hear about, they wouldn't happen. But they're happening because people will pay. And Governor Newsom announced this week that he is talking to realtors and landlords and state legislators about doing this precise thing, getting an anti-price gouging rent cap. He may not have used the terminology price gouging, but in any case, he's got a tough road ahead of him to negotiate that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of opposition and all. A couple seconds left. What do the landlords say about the housing crisis? Do they address
Well, they
that?
acknowledge that there is one. And they say what needs to happen is that tenants' wages need to go up. And, you know, there is apartment rents have gone up 20% in California since 2014. Wages have gone up 9%. How sustainable is that?
All right. But we do have, of course, some minimum wage increases in laws in San Diego and elsewhere, and maybe that will address that. And another issue to watch moving forward. Going to be a lot of interesting battles on that one. Well, we're going to move on. California's largest investor-owned utility is going under. Facing estimated wildfire liabilities of $30 billion, Pacific Gas and Electric says it will declare bankruptcy by month's end. Utility officials say the move won't impact delivery of electricity and gas to its 16 million Northern California customers. It's an important story for San Diego, as San Diego Gas and Electric has faced liability issues of its own. So, Rob, start there with what fire investigators have found as they look for the causes of these terrible wildfires in the last 2 years, especially last year.
Well, they found that in some cases, they've tied that some of the sparking of these fires to utilities. The Camp Fire, which killed, I believe, 86 people in Northern California,
destroyed 14,000 homes,
and is still under investigation. But there's some suspicion that PG&E is responsible for that. So the larger issue about wildfires, out of control wildfires, especially in the last few years, is really why we're in this position right now.
And that liability, as we said, it would extend certainly to the utility here and to
Right.
Los Angeles, across the state.
Right. Yeah, there's something called, it's rather unique to California. It's called inverse condemnation. And it's this concept, it's a legal concept, in which a utility, even if it has followed all the prescribed safety rules, if their equipment is tied to the ignition of a fire, they are responsible for paying that. And that's something that is rather unique to California.
All right, and we mentioned at the outset they're looking at $30 billion, yes. And that's why they have to give notice that they're going to go the bankruptcy route.
That's a number that's been bandied about, but
it's just an estimate.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a squishy number because we don't know for sure if those fires at the Camp Fire were definitely caused by PG&E equipment.
And the PG&E safety record already under scrutiny,
yeah.
Right? Big stories on that.
Well, yeah, you've got, going back to 2010, the San Bruno natural gas pipeline explosion that killed 8 people up in Northern California. There was also subsequent investigations that showed that maybe PG&E was cooking the books and maybe obscuring some data in regards to that explosion. So PG&E has come under a lot of fire and has been called a bad actor by a number of people, especially politicians in Northern California.
So given that public safety record, how much sympathy is there for this declaration of bankruptcy?
Well, not much. That's the short answer. PG&E, especially in the state legislature and in Northern California, does not have a whole lot of sympathy for it. But the larger question becomes, if you let if PG&E goes through with its bankruptcy, then what happens? And what does that mean to ratepayers' bills? And I talked to Gary Ackerman, who's a former executive director of the Western Power Trading Association, or Trading Forum. It's a group of members of a member group that trades power with Western states. And he says the idea that, well, we're just going to let PG&E go bankrupt might sound attractive and maybe somewhat satisfying in the short term. But if PG&E goes under, going back to the last time PG&E went under back in 2001 during the California energy crisis, what ended up happening in the long run was that the ratepayers ended up paying more money in the long run. So there's a lot of moving pieces to this.
Yeah, it is a very complicated issue, and it's going to play out over a long period of time. The new governor, Gavin Newsom, says he's dealing with wildfires and utilities. He says that's a top priority for him. I mean, there's the Democratic control, obviously, legislature. You're going to have to step in at some point here and come to some sort of consensus.
Well, I think there's not a real clear path forward, both when it comes to policy and also when it comes to the politics of this. Jerry Hill, who's from Northern California, who's in the state legislature, has been very critical of PG&E. Now that it looks like PG&E is going to go ahead with this bankruptcy, is taking more of a wait-and-see attitude. I think that a lot of the questions will get hashed out once, if PG&E does go through with this bankruptcy, which they're expected to, what the bankruptcy judge does. It's sometimes kind of a fire sale, so to speak. Yeah. Probably bad term to use there.
But it does bring another player in. That bankruptcy judge is going to have a lot of power, at least in this instance.
And the governor could, if he steps in and becomes more forceful in this, would have some say in this as well, because the state could stand up and say, all right, we may not think that PG&E has been a great actor, but we will stand behind the investments that have been made here in order to protect them.
Well, another actor in all of this, Amitha, is, and of course many critics, including UT's editorial board, have pointed this out. They say the problem has been the State Public Utilities Commission, too cozy with the utilities. Just summarize some of the things that have been questionable in the news with the PUC.
Well, the Public Utilities Commission, which its job is to oversee the state's power companies, are the watchdog, but as you and I have discussed in the newsroom, they've often been accused of being a lapdog instead of a watchdog. There was a really just scathing report that came out a few years ago condemning the PUC for basing its multi-billion-dollar decisions concerning the public utilities not on evidence, not on discussion and debate in the public sphere, but on these private meetings with the energy companies. And that in the end, it's the public who's paid the price. Now, those private meetings have been restricted a great deal, but it has left a legacy of mistrust.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to bring up, again, we were talking about the new governor and all. Can we see a shakeup with the PUC, do you think, under Newsom, or does that remain to be seen?
I think that remains to be seen. And as I said before, I think a lot of it depends on what the bankruptcy judge was able to lay out, and also what PG&E, provided that they do go through bankruptcy. We're still not 100% they're going to do it. It looks like it. Provided that they give a path forward and see what the bankruptcy judge says.
All right, we got about a minute left. I did want to ask, bring this back around to San Diego Gas and Electric. They face the same kind of wildfire liability, maybe not right now, but the wildfires are just getting worse with climate change, as we all know.
Exactly, and I asked the people at SDG&E back on Monday when this PG&E story came out about what it meant for them, and they said, quote, the circumstances of investor-owned utilities are not the same across the board, distancing themselves from PG&E. And in fairness, SDG&E has received some praise for a number of the things that they've been doing. They de-energize their lines more often than the other investor-owned utilities. They've spent $1 billion in investments in things like hardening the system, putting steel poles instead of wooden poles. They've invested a lot of money in a weather center that is able to anticipate fires. And whether it was just a one-off or not, back in November, when Southern California Edison and PG&E suffered a lot of dramatic wildfires, there weren't any here in San Diego. Maybe that was just a one-off, but they point to the Weather Center and the other things that they've done.
All right, we're out of time, but we will pick this up. It's going to be a long story and playing over many months to come. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, Rob Nicoleski of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Amitha Sharma, also of KPBS. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.